Welcome. So this is going to be a video series where I make a whole 1911 A1 out of metal at home from scratch. So welcome. Okay, so part 1 is going to be the barrel. So I had 3D printed this little part a few months earlier, and it was a perfect fit for the gun. So the only thing I had left was to make it out of metal, and that is what I will be showing you today. So as you can see, I'm using some wax. It's just normal candle wax. I'm using this to plug all the difficult creases and holes for the plaster that I will be using soon. Here I'm just taking a piece of wax so I can plug the hole in the barrel. I did this on the other side of the barrel as well, but I didn't film that part. But you understand, it's the same process but on the other side, so you don't want any plaster going into the hole, so I tried to make it as tight as possible. I did that by just pushing it with force, and it worked pretty well. Here I used a stainless steel stick, I guess, that I heated up with a blowtorch. I used this because I needed to fix up the surface of the wax. I like this tool because you can really get accurate with what you want to melt and what you don't want to melt. So I use this a lot. This part is a very important step in the process because if I hadn't done this, you wouldn't be able to pull the part out of the plaster. You could use another material that isn't wax, but I like to use wax because it has a very low melting point and it's very easy to use and to work with. And here I'm just sketching out my plan for how I will proceed with this casting, because I will 3D print the case or the holder that I will pour the plaster into. I like to keep about 3 centimeters or so between the edge of the case and the object, just so the metal doesn't leak out when I cast it later. So, and then I'm also making a big pouring spout just so it has enough pressure to get it into all the creases and the divots and all those stuff. Then I designed the case in a program called Inventor. It's a very well-known CAD program. It was pretty simple. It's just a rectangle, so it was really simple to CAD it out. And then I 3D printed it. It took about 1 hour. It was really quick. And then I taped it to my table so I could pour the plaster into it. Here I'm using some duct tape just to keep it down and also to prevent the plaster from leaking out. Then I also cut a little slit in the plastic just so it would be easier to remove the case later. I then mixed up some plaster. This was just normal plaster that you can find in the hardware store. The reason why I like tin so much is it's the melting temperature is really low, so you can really use quite any type of plaster to cast it in. And then I pour the plaster into the mold case. And I accidentally missed a tiny spot right there, but it didn't really matter because you can just snap it off when it cures. There are different of methods you can use when casting with plaster, but I use this method where you just put the object into the plaster and let it sit there until it cures. I will have to use another method when I cast the receiver for the gun. You will see it in a later video where I used clay, but it wasn't really necessary because this object was so simple. And here I carefully removed the barrel from the plaster, very carefully, and thankfully it came out perfect. There were some air bubbles, but air bubbles doesn't really matter because the metal doesn't usually pick them up. And if the metal picks up, it's really easy to sand it off or file it off. Here I make some registration points. This is just so when I make the second part of the mold, it locks into place, because the second part will just be an inverted model of this part. And then here I spray some clear acrylic spray, just so the two parts doesn't stick together. This is not necessary, but I like to do this just as an extra precaution. And then it was time to make the second part of the mold. I printed another case for the plaster and use some tape just to keep it in place. And then I put the part in, and I messed up at this part because I forgot to put some lubrication or Vaseline or grease, whatever, into it before pouring it, but it still worked. It was just a bit hard to separate the two molds. I then poured the plaster on top of it, and I put this paper towel on top of it just so it would absorb the water, a bit faster, because I'm very impatient. I removed the tape, and then I removed the 3D printed case from it. It was pretty simple. I just slowly pulled it up and then got it out. It was really easy. And then this was the moment I realized I forgot the Vaseline. I pried them apart, and the two parts came out looking pretty rough, but it still worked. And then I just removed the part from it. It didn't really matter because the imperfections were like registration points, so I just counted it as a win and moved on. Then I made a pouring spout, and it's important to make this pretty large because you need the pressure of this extra metal on the top, so all the metal goes down into the small grooves and stuff. I then used a clamp to clamp the two parts together. I should have used more clamps, but I didn't really think I had to. So this was my first pour, and actually my first pour was my best pour. I had preheated the mold in the oven at 200 Celsius for about half an hour before this. You do this because you don't want any moisture in the mold when pouring, because it can cause bubbling. As you can see, the pour was very successful, and you can even see all of the tiny little details of the original piece that I made this mold out of. The metal was very hot, but I really wanted to see how it turned out in the backside, so I just took it out, and it was absolutely perfect. The only thing was that it had some bubbles, but it was very easy to remove that, so it wasn't an issue. The metal had a very interesting pattern, I thought, and the color was also very off. Normally the color of tin is almost a silver stainless steel color. I would say that if you combine both silver and the color of stainless steel, you get tin. So I thought it was really odd, but all this was probably just oxidation, and it was easily removed. Tin is a very soft metal, so it was really easy to remove all these small bubbles that formed when I cast the metal. And then I used a file to remove all the seams and the flashing from the mold. It was really simple. It only took about 10 minutes to remove everything. That is why I love tin so much, because it feels durable and sturdy, even if it's not really. After using the file to remove all the big imperfections, I started with sandpaper instead, because I needed a softer touch and a slow increase in grit. I'm not making this to be functional, I'm just making this because I want the feel of an actual metal gun. Often when I find small imperfections in the metal, I use this method where I put super glue and some dust particles in the hole and sand it out. It levels out the surface to create a smooth finish. You might be confused as of why the part changed colors suddenly, but I use this method where you paint the whole thing a certain color so you can see if you missed sanding a certain part. I then use this little homemade apparatus just to drill the hole. It's basically just a manual drill. And then this little part comes in. I didn't really film this part because it was such a small part, but you will see in later videos why this is a necessary part for the gun when I assembled the whole thing with all the finished pieces. At this point the barrel was done. I just had to make the hole that goes through it, but I will do that in a later video. Thank you very much for watching. Goodbye.